Hi, it's Warren Huart here with ProduceLikeAPro.com. Thank you ever so much for watching. Today we're going to talk about vocals. Now, I've done quite a few different videos over the last few months since we've been running the channel on vocals, but I'm going to get into greater depth vocal mixing and just show you all the little tricks I do. So this is our comprehensive vocal mixing video. And we're going to use a track called It All Comes Back Around. We just did a video on it and I did touch on the elements, but I'll go a little slower and I'll talk about all the little details I did. So please enjoy this and please ask millions of questions, etc. And I will go into as much detail as possible. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so what we have here is the song All Comes Back Around. It's Elena Blair. We've featured a couple of her songs in our How to Arrange series. And I thought of this one just because it's a relatively simple production. There's only a couple of loop ideas. There's just some strings, piano, bass, and one stereo guitar idea. So it gives us a lot of room to hear what I'm doing in the vocal. So first of all, let's just talk about the vocal. The vocal has to feel present in the mix at all times. I want to hear the vocal in a simple piano vocal song like this. I need every inflection of her voice to come through. So let's have a listen to the mix.
There's a space between.
There, for instance, that's the first line. And it's really imperfect, but it's imperfect in a beautiful way. You know, she honestly had a little bit of a sore throat. She'd been singing, she had done, and I often ask people, you know, what's one of the most famous vocals of all time? And, you know, obviously there's a lot of debates over to what that might be, but one of the most famous Beatle vocals, of course, is Twist and Shout. And Twist and Shout was the last song that John Lennon sang after singing for 17 hours or 13 hours, whatever it was, when they did their first album. They did it straight. So he's got that "Shake Little Baby Now," and everybody identifies with it and they go, oh my God, it's so passionate, and he's ripping his voice. And it's because he was at the end of a very long day of singing 10 songs. So his voice was really worn out and it just has that passion. So I like keeping those kind of elements. So on my vocal comp, I deliberately chose that first line.
There's a space between.
So for me, the first thing I will say before we get into any details, and this will be our number one thing, is when you're comping, you know, compiling the vocal, find the moments that are not just in tune or in time, but have a lot of charisma. We identify with the imperfections in the voice as much as we identify with the tuning and the timing. So for me, that is a great first line. It's just her and me playing piano.
There's a space between, like holding the universe, trying to find out what it means. Is love all we need, or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
And hear that little bit of breath at the end of that as well. See, I love all of that stuff. And there's a little kind of moments where you hear the compression choking and bringing out the breaths a little much. But you know what? I like all of that. It draws me in. It makes me want to hear her vocal. So up through that first verse, let's just concentrate on that area. That is all just a vocal and piano. After compiling it, what do? I did some volume writing. So before even all of this compression and EQ and effects or whatever, the first thing I did was bring out different lines. So here is the volume automation. This is over the whole song. If you look here, there is a ton of volume automation where when there's little lines that maybe there's breaths and the way that she phrases at the end that I want to exaggerate. So I am sitting there and I'm automating the vocal. So it's a little bit harder work than just sitting there and sending direct volume in and compressing and EQing just that. I'm actually pushing it first, but I'm doing lots of things on this vocal. So this vocal is good because it shows a lot of different techniques that I do. Okay, so we'll just concentrate on this first verse. So look, you can see here the line's a little stronger. And here, it's weaker on the end. So I'm actually pushing the vocal.
There's a space between.
I love that. So that between us is kind of whispered. And so here it is. It's very straightforward. You can see here where it's hitting the compression a little harder. So I pulled it down because all of this stuff is going into a vocal sub. So now I've got an R-Vox across it here.
There's a space between.
Watch it again and listen.
There's a space between.
So, there's up to 5 dBs worth of compression going when she hits it really hard.
There's a space between.
Maybe 6 at one point. I do like the sound of the R-Vox. It adds a lot of fatness. Let's try it out.
There's a space between.
That's just as nice. Just a little.
There's a space between.
Yeah, it's doing just enough for me. Okay, so what we've got is some volume automation. And then if you look here, for instance, here's a line which is quite powerful and it's actually being cut down quite dramatically.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
So what we did on this line, if we zoom in just on this line, we brought it down where it's going too heavily into my bus, pushed it up here, and then exaggerated this line at the end for the breadth.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
And I wouldn't be afraid to go in and do this even. Maybe just a little bit. See this area here? And push that a little bit. Let's have a listen.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Bring out the F a little bit. Maybe bring it down a little bit. These are subtle moves. Hopefully it comes across on YouTube.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
And this ending here, we could even exaggerate it a little more. We could do this. See, on my volume automation, just bringing it up here.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Now, compression can do all of these things. However, each compressor has its own sound. So, I was talking in the All Comes Back Around video about how the great engineers such as Bruce Botnick and stuff, Bruce would do this, and all the great guys from the 50s and 60s would do these on fader moves. They would sit there, would have a chart, they would have all the lyrics written down, and they would literally write, and I've done it many times myself, they would write down where the singer is pushing and pulling. And before sophisticated VCA compressors, where compressors had much slower attack and release times, like LA2As and Fairchilds, which sound wonderful, but they don't have fast and attack and release times. So they would do this manually. They would sit there on the fader, and they would sit there and they'd push and pull the vocal, so it didn't distort, and it kept the clean vocal at all times going to tape. So this is us doing that. This is us reproducing and replicating it. And the reason why I'm doing it on the vocal initially is because I'm then going into a sub down here. So I want to control how it's being compressed. Okay, so even with all this vocal writing here, I felt like I just wanted to pull back a little bit on the trim. So there's a 1.7 dB pull back. Now, the reason why I did that is I don't want to send a clipping signal from one plugin to another. You can end up with compression, etc., and limiting, sending a nice level signal to your master bus. And it doesn't look like it's clipping at all, but it still sounds bright and aggressive. That is because it's probably clipping from one plugin to another. You don't want to send a clip signal into the compressor and then have the compressor pull it down so it looks, not sounds, but looks like it's not clipping. It's important to send a signal from one plugin to another that doesn't clip going into it. Because yes, the compressor will pull it down so that the output of the compressor isn't clipping, but the signal that's gone in may have clipped. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's a very important thing for me. So I trimmed that down just to give myself some room. Now, the next thing I'm using is a vocal rider, which is actually a simulation of what we're doing. Watch it here.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
See, it's exaggerating
Or
the
is it
move.
mixed with a little fate and destiny?
See how great that is? It's doing a little bit more of what I'm doing. And you can control it from the top and the bottom, the range. You can have it do very small movements. I'm having it do very large movements. But that's the next thing after my volume automation. I discovered this plugin. It is fantastic. And it's exaggerating what I'm doing. Next is some little EQ. I pulled out some of the pure mid-range at 830. There's a bass definition there. There is, a little honkiness in the piano, and I just felt like they were all beating each other up there.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
It's that little nosiness. If I take it off,
Or is it mixed with a little fate?
it's very in that, so I pull out that.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Just a little tiny pull out of that. It's like a couple of dB. The Q's kind of wide-ish, and then there's a nice presence lift here at 7K just to give it over the top. And a gentle roll-off. We don't need the super, super lows in there, but it's not a steep. It's only 60 dB an octave, and it's a nice gentle low roll-off. I don't do really, really aggressive low-pass filter or high-pass filter work, top and bottom. I don't do that unless I've got like key stuff. If you've got like really dense EDM tracks and everything is massive, then sometimes you have to sculpt them. But on organic, natural, analog instruments like vocals and acoustic guitars and basses and drums, you won't see me do really aggressive high and low pass. You'll see me do really soft, gentle ones, just so they sit in. Because if you treat them like a synthesizer, it'll end up sounding very harsh. The only other time I've seen people do that is maybe on heavy, heavy rock guitars, where you might have to go aggressive on some of the super lows because it's messing in the way. But otherwise, use very gentle low and high pass filters. Okay, next and most importantly, now that I did a little presence boost, which was on the vocal and made it sound really beautiful, I did a little DSO.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
See, a little fate and destiny. It's just pulling out some of that exaggerated.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
And again, watch it here.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
So it's taking out the exaggerated S's because I just added the 7K, so it's going to exaggerate them a little bit. But I want the air on the vocal at all times, but where it gets exaggerated, I'm pulling it back. And it's at about 6K.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Take it off.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
It's subtle. It's doing like 2 or 3 dBs worth of reduction. And then I went to a little REQ and added just a little bit more top. Again, I tend to do 2 or 3 EQ plugins and just shape it lightly around the instruments. You can simulate it all with one. However, I've learned this from working with many great mixers. Michael Brower, for instance, who's obviously very well known from Coldplay and a bunch of other very successful acts, will do multiple amounts of EQ and compression, but doing little tiny amounts. And that will give you a much more rounded and less processed signal than when you take one plugin and boost huge amounts of EQ and pull out huge amounts of EQ. This is a very gentle presence lift. So again, another.
Or is it mixed with a little boost. Fate and destiny?
And then I've got some gentle R comp here.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Just a gentle amount of compression there. And the ratio is only 2.2. So it's like, it shows it's compressing, but we're only talking.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Again, another little bit of high boost, followed by another de-esser.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
And then, believe it or not, one more vocal rider.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
You see, at that point, the movement is very subtle. We're talking like less than 2 to 3 dB of movement, but it's keeping that vocal nice and consistent. So it's dropping the piano against it.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Just kept that vocal nice and consistent and in the front. Now you can do all of the vocal writing stuff manually. If you don't have the plugin, you could do all of this, all this vocal writing stuff here on our channel there. In fact, sometimes, you can copy your vocal automation down onto your sub and do it that way. Instead of using very harsh compression, because you saw I was using little tiny bits of compression, or putting a limiter or anything like that across it, I'm doing more fade movement. I'm doing more Bruce Botnick, even though he was probably also using an LA2A or a Fairchild as well going in, and then maybe an LA2A and a Fairchild on a mix, again using 2 or 3 compressors in, 2 or 3 compressors on the out. He still was using the fader. It gives you a little bit more control. It means that when it's hitting the compressor, it's hitting it evenly. So if we go back to our R comp here, watch it.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
See, even right up to the very end, even when the vocal is dropping down here, it keeps a consistent 2 to 3 dBs worth of compression until it just gets to the destiny, the breath at the very end. So you know that we're sending a nice even signal into our compressor and we're bringing it forward.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Great, keeps that vocal ever present. Okay, so let's take the piano out a second. Let's see what else we've got going on. Now I've got my vocal distortion sub here. So what I'm doing is I'm using, the reason why I put a de-esser across it in the first place is because I don't want this to be super harsh and bright on my distortion, and then compressing the signal. This is coming straight off our lead vocal. So our same bus here, 123, is sending to this as well. So we're compressing the signal.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Boosting the top end, but controlling it with another de-esser.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
So it's an even signal. So let's listen to just that element. Let me open these all up and we'll hear them all individually. Okay, so here's just the distortion sub. The last thing on it is the lo-fi. Now the lo-fi plugin comes with Pro Tools. Now I talked about this before in another video, but I'll explain it again. Why do I do this schnizzle? Why do I do this whisper and the distortion and the octave? Well, first of all, I've been doing it a long time, so I found these to be very effective. But I work a lot with a guy called Jack Douglas, and Jack produced obviously Aerosmith and a whole bunch of other people. But one of the tricks he did with John Lennon's vocal is he would take a crowd noise of people cheering, go, yeah, and he put it against John Lennon's vocal, but he would gate it to the lead vocal. So then John would do, imagine all the people. There's like this, and it's very low level, and it's just this level of excitement, like, yeah, going on, but it's gated to the vocal. Now, that's a difficult trick to do. I didn't have a great vocal, simulation of a crowd going. So I simulate it with a distortion. So all it is just energy behind the vocal. Now you hear the de-esser and etc. on it. So it's just a little aggression. You just add some aggression behind it. Next up is our vocal octave sub. And that literally is, here you see here, I'll bring it into the middle, an octave lower on the vocal, super buried in there. Yeah, it's terrible sounding on its own. Dreadful. Sounds like Beelzebub. But it's buried low against it, just to give it some width, just to make it feel just a little stronger. Here's the two things together, distortion and the vocal low. And last but no means least is the more foda, which is our vocal whisper track. Which gives us some extra air on the vocal. Here's all three together. Drop that in against the lead vocal.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny? Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny?
Let's add in, let's just listen to it on its own. Our old friend, Distorted, slapback, with our vocal thickening trick. You can go to the vocal thickening video for that. And here's our vocal.
Or is it mixed with a little fate and destiny? Or is it mixed with a little fate and death?
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you had a marvelous time. Please leave some questions and comments down below. A lot of these tricks are used by a lot of great mixers. I've borrowed them, stolen them. We've swapped the ideas. They're unique ways to make the vocal appear more breathy and open sounding and more in your face in the mix. Like I said, I've been judging a mixing competition and you guys have been doing an incredible job. I cannot believe the quality of the work out there. You know, I watch a lot of videos on YouTube with different guys and girls talking about, you know, their mixing techniques. And to be honest, most of the stuff I've been getting is better. It's just really good. Your mixes are fantastic. You've been working really hard. I'm very, very impressed. So please leave questions, leave comments. Let's have a great discussion about this. Please subscribe, sign up for the email list at producelikeapro.com and have a marvelous time recording.